My husband's girl best friend is pregnant and she says it's his. So I met my husband, 25 male, while I was 22 and we hit it off instantly. He was the man of my dreams. He took me on date nights and made sure I was loved and gave me big gifts every so often, telling me I was the only one for him. I believe this since we have been together for 4 years now and I've never had any issues, until he introduced his best friend who we will call Laura for privacy reasons. I remember we had an argument because he didn't tell me about her for our whole relationship, and he had been sneaking to see her and hang out with her at parties when I was sleeping, believing that he was working overtime. I was hurt by this and my first thought immediately went to infidelity, but I found all of their texts to be platonic after he willingly told me to look. I thought she was nice at first since when I first met her she spoke to me politely and said how lucky I was for about a week, until there was a get-together and my husband invited me along, because it was her mother's anniversary and her family loved my husband, as they had known each other since they were kids. I was okay with this and quite excited since I wanted to make more female friends and have girls' nights out to relieve my work stress, since my job is difficult and I make 6 figures. I should also mention my husband works in an office job that doesn't pay a lot, so I handle all of the house bills and chores while he is trying to get another job. I walked into the house with my husband and she ran to him happy and immediately wrapped her whole body around his arm and dragged him off to the garden. He didn't even come to get me or anything after being dragged away, so I went to the kitchen to ask for a drink where I was greeted by Laura's mother. She is a lovely person. We generally had a nice talk about our own lives and she made sure I felt welcome. The whole gathering was mainly nothing special till it got to the dinner. I sat down next to my husband and Laura walked up to me and asked me to move. I asked why since the only other spot available was next to her uncle and mother, and since it was about her mother, wouldn't she want to sit next to her? Laura replied to the question with, because I want to sit next to him. I turned to my husband who just nodded and told me to move as well, saying that I was being childish and making a scene. At this point I generally felt my blood boiling. I stood up and told my husband that I felt uncomfortable and that I needed to go to the bathroom and ask where it was. Laura told me and I left the table doing breathing exercises trying to calm down. I ended up messaging my brother from the bathroom and he said I was being jealous and that I was overreacting, so I agreed and went back to the table to sit next to Laura's mother. The whole time they were laughing and it seemed that everything he said was funny to her, and she kept rubbing his back, touching his arms, and saying how strong he had gotten, and she would look at me smugly. The breaking point to all of this was when I put a bit of meat onto my plate and she said, "Are you really going to eat all of that?" And I froze in embarrassment while my husband and her laughed. Her mother stood up for me saying that was inappropriate and to treat guests with respect, but she ignored it. Laura is very pretty and slim and works out, so coming from her it hurt a lot. I stood up from my chair and walked out the front door and called my dad. I told him to pick me up and that I'll explain why in the car. When I got in the car I broke down and told him everything. He said I was most likely overreacting but the situation was very odd, and that I'm welcome to stay with him for the time being. I thanked him and went back to our house. While I was getting comfortable my phone flooded up with messages from my husband and Laura. I read the messages and to my horror my husband was saying I ruined the whole dinner and that he was going to stay there for the night. I then read what Laura said, saying I had ruined her night because of my pick-me behavior. After doing research on that word it's only filled me up with more anger. My husband came home around 5 p.m. from Laura's and I immediately said, leaving me and staying at another woman's house was disgusting, and he started shouting that I'm overreacting again and that I need to go to counseling for my jealousy issues. For about a month everything was going okay again, apart from that my husband getting more distant and cold, and I could feel that our argument wedged a gap in our marriage, until I got a message from Laura this morning with a positive pregnancy result, and a threat saying we should get divorced because it's my husband's. I don't know what to do and I'm just venting because I feel awful, and I feel like I failed as a wife. I don't know if I should confront my husband, but I'm thinking about it. My husband's girl best friend is pregnant and says it's his. Update. My husband came home around 6 in the morning to where he threw his keys on the side and went upstairs without saying anything to me. I thought this was a little rude and I walked up after him telling him we need to talk, but he said he was tired and needed to sleep, which just made me angry because I was serious. I told him halfway up the stairs that I knew about him and Laura, to which he then looked at me confused. I explained my side in the text and what it seemed like and he ended up laughing in my face. This filled me up with so much petty rage because I have had enough of being walked on, so I pushed past him into our room and got out a suitcase from under the bed, and started to pack his stuff for him. He started shouting at me saying really horrible things, but I didn't hear most of it since I was crying uncontrollably and busy ramming every item of clothing he owned. Most of it didn't fit but he could come collect it later. One insult that stood out to me was crazy BTCH, and this is where I snapped and said some horrible things too. I know I called him a bad husband but in more of a ruder tone. He ended up leaving with his suitcase I packed in a plastic bag after I said I would get my dad involved if he didn't leave. After, I took a recommended comment and told my family everything. My brother didn't care but my father was so angry there might have been steam coming from the phone after the call. I haven't heard from my soon-to-be ex-husband but his response to my question was complete disrespect, and I wasn't able to hold it in for much longer. I'm sure what I did was a complete overreaction and was regretting it, till I texted Laura's mother since I said I would do that. She didn't reply till 11 in the morning. But basically what happened is that she only met my husband 2 years ago, which I'm guessing is through the time of constant overtime from him. He is also staying there currently. This made me so angry that I texted Laura something petty which I don't regret. I hadn't replied to her yet, so I told her that she can have him, and I can't wait till the same things happen to her and she gets cheated on. She's not replied yet or seen it. I have screenshot everything she said in the picture and will be calling a lawyer later on. Nothing else has really happened. If it does, I will give another update. Thanks everyone. My husband's girl best friend is pregnant and she says it's his. Update 2. I have no idea how to start this. I'm at a loss for words and I feel generally sick, and this is the lowest point I think I've recently hit mentally. I'm going to try and be punctual for this, but I cannot stop crying and I feel so betrayed. Thank you all for the support and love you have given me, and so for this it has motivated me to tell everyone what has happened. Laura called me early in the morning, not sure why so late, but I wasn't doing much anyway. I was replying to comments and cleaning the kitchen, swallowing in self-pity. Pathetic, I know. She was shouting at me, calling me out for cheating on my husband first and that my hypocrisy was laughable. I was genuinely mortified since I've never done that and asked her what she meant, and apparently my husband, the man that's supposed to back me up and love me unconditionally, told her a huge sob story lie. Apparently in our argument he told her I hit him out of a jealous rage and that I threw his stuff out the window, which is why he left. I told her I was the one to kick him out and he didn't leave on his own accord, and definitely never laid hands on him, especially since he is 6'1" and I am 5'4". She didn't believe me and told me the whole reason she had done what she did in the first place was to teach me not to cheat, and that my husband was a good man, and that if I continued, another woman who's better than me would take him, but in the end she decided to end it for him, so she sent me the messages. She agreed what she did was childish and also confessed to only liking him platonically and did him a favor because of all the horrible stuff I had done. I believe this was so she would take him in? I have no clue why he would lie about stuff this serious. After he was there for a while, she told her mother the same story he told her, and her mother has blocked me. I showed her the messages my husband sent, and after countless back and forths with her, we ended up agreeing to meet and that I should cancel meeting up with my husband. She's conflicted at this point in time since I told her the lies were fake. She also said that my husband told her that I knew about her after she saw him and me on a Facebook post. I'm guessing she did some snooping and my husband wasn't very private online. So she asked why I never was mentioned, and he said the conversation never came up, and I'm guessing that's where the lies begun. The day where he didn't come home till 5 was because she told him that she was going to send the picture of her friend's old pregnancy test to me and pretend it's hers so he could not continue with being treated like that, and he actually went to hers instead of going home to be confronted, and hoped it would all blow over in the morning. Laura also confessed that he also tried to entice her into making love with him, which she said no and thought it was a little odd. I'm guessing this caused her to call me since that moment was a red flag to her and was still on his side, but wanted to hear my side before she blocked me. I want nothing to do with him, and even the thought of him fills me up with hate. I've never met a man so disgusting. I never have once laid hands on my husband, and the allegations completely disrespect people who are actually stuck in those spousal situations. I don't know how much more I can put up with this, and everything is really getting to me. I'm genuinely sick and will certainly not be meeting him and want nothing to do with him. But hopefully meeting Laura to properly explain the truth. I doubt anything else interesting will happen, just boring legal stuff. If it does, I most likely won't make another update since I'm feeling mentally drained.
What's the most outrageous thing that was banned at your school? We had to start a Pokemon fight club because of this. When I was in 6th grade, our school had a ban on Pokemon cards. To my anime-infatuated mind, this was completely uncalled for. So I started a group. It was small at first, just a handful of my friends. We pretended to have Pokemon and would stage imaginary battles during recess or in the hallways between classes. We had a loose system of rules, mainly a point system.
So y'all
based on
tried
who won.
mini taco
These could
pizzas for
originally be
Poppy
divided
and
by
they
how
were a
creatively you
hit.
used your attacks,
Everybody
and eventually
loved
were
them.
organized
These
by our
are the
residents who our kids
ingredients
were
that
more
I use
structured.
over
Fair fight
different
using a
types
rough
of
idea of how
cheeses,
powerful
and
certain
then I
attacks were from the
spray
game.
some taco
You
sauce
basically
at
had
all
to
the
decide at the beginning
toppings
of the day
on
which attacks your
top.
Pokemon would know.
Sprinkle
And
a
if you
little
messed up and
cheese
picked
on
something dumb
top
and
and then
useless,
put
you
it
would
in the
probably
oven
lose.
for about 2 or 3
Eventually,
minutes
there were
and
about 15
then
of us playing, not really
boom.
disrupting anything. But
They
the
were
original 5 of us became gym leaders, and were allowed to have 2 Pokemon. Soon, word got around the school that there was a cool Pokemon group during recess, and in the span of one day we added about 30 kids to our group. By the end of the week, we had over 100. This is where it gets real. There were now so many kids in my Pokemon club that our gyms expanded. The top players were gym leaders based on type, and we each had a hierarchy of underlings vying for the top spots in the gym. There was even a rumor going around that whoever got all the gym badges would be the Pokemon king. Our school was pretty large, and the 6th grade was divided into an A side and a B side. Same times of day, just a different 4 classes at the end on the other side of the school. One morning, a couple of my fellow gym leaders informed me that there was a rival Pokemon club doing the same stuff on the A side, and they were letting just anyone have gym badges. The nerve of them. Well, this whole fair play BS was aggravating. To the perfect foundation of the absolute monarchy I was creating, so I called a meeting with A side's leader. Something had to give, and it wasn't going to be my supreme rule. His name was Tristan. This boy was pudgy, bespectacled, and had a long, dirty blonde mullet. He wore Dragon Ball Z shirts and had Ninja Scroll buttons on his backpack. Worst of all, he was the smartest kid in the 6th grade. He had scored in the 99th percentile on the test of basic skills, and his parents spent a part of their paycheck every week on anime for him and his brother. I hated Tristan. We gathered our boys and some girls and met at a table in the lunchroom. Each of us brought our top 4 generals with us to discuss what was to be done. We eventually decided that there would be a showdown between Tristan and me, and the loser would dissolve their Pokemon club and have to walk around the school excommunicated from the rest of us. Fine by me. I had a plan. We set it for the next afternoon's lunch. It was the only time when A side and B side would be together. When the bell rang, I went from my class right to the lunchroom, where I had all of my gym leaders waiting. There they were, looking like something out of a dream, the stuff legends were made out of. We were like Arthur and his Knights of the Round. All the kids knew what was going down, and the tension in the lunchroom was thick. Even the lunch ladies seemed nervous as they saw the quiet our future skirmish had brought to our battlefield. Tristan was wearing a blue Sailor Moon jacket with a Felix the Cat t-shirt underneath. I was wearing something forgettable, but I had a tight grip on a piece of paper in my hand. As we entered our makeshift battle circle, the largest spot where 2 tables weren't touching, Tristan spoke. "I'll be using Zapdos and Gyarados," he bellowed, holding up a picture of the 2 of them that had been crudely forged together using MS Paint. I was in awe of his abilities, but his emphasis on both DOS steeled my reserve. I let Tristan spend his watt on his speech. He was smart and showed it off with his use of words that even now I'm not sure if they were real. He informed everyone of the fight about to happen and what that would mean for the rival groups. At this point, most of the kids in the school were involved in our clubs, which is a staggering achievement. The hushed silence was pregnant with anticipation as he finished, and all eyes turned to me for my rebuttal. I savored that moment. I knew I would defeat him. I had a trump card. But then it hit me. I had a great idea. Greater than the one my stupid subordinates had previously cobbled together. They had handed me a contract of sorts, signed by all of them, giving me complete control of the Pokemon Club, their gyms, and bending fealty to me as the Pokemon King. However, this wasn't good enough for Tristan. I cleared my throat. The other 11-year-olds waited with bated breath. I began, lifting the contract to my eyes as if I was reading. But guess what? I wasn't. "You were so good last night. We had good intimacy and it was better than my husband. You're going to win your Pokemon battle tomorrow because you're sexy and Tristan sucks. Signed, Tristan's mom." I quickly tacked on the end. "P.S. Tristan is gay." The immediate laughter was music to my ears. Hundreds of tiny, prepubescent cackles filled the lunchroom. Some kids started clapping. Others cheered. Eventually, the entire 3rd floor could hear the rumble of applause emanating from the cafeteria as I had completely destroyed Tristan's character. I took a dramatic bow in front of my adoring fans, knowing I had bested my rival. Then I felt an intense, blinding pain and collapsed backward over one of the tables. Tristan had tackled me and was attempting to hit me but didn't really know how. He was heavy, however, and it was hard to breathe, so I bit him in his breast. The applause had turned to who's and chance of kill him, and so forth. Eventually, we were pried apart by administrators and sent home. I received a 3-day in-school suspension once I returned on Monday, and was grounded all weekend. As I walked proudly from the entrance to Mr. Matlock's office that morning, I noticed paper signs all over the walls. "No Pokemon acting groups, any student caught pretending to be Pokemon will be suspended." What started off as a small lie but ended up as this is my life now. One night in Vegas for a bachelor party, I got wasted and made a bet with a friend while we were out at the club. If you're wrong, you have to pretend to be British the rest of the night. I lost, and so I was British. A few moments later, I met a girl who started talking to me because she overheard me saying some BS to my friends in a British accent. She thought that I was British, and I went with it. I got intimate with the girl that night. But when I woke up with her the next morning, I realized I had to continue to be British. She said that we should hang out again that night. Sure. We met up that night and she brought all of her friends, who all think that I'm British. So I was British again but around more people. My friends were dying every time I spoke. One tried to be Australian around the girl's friends but was called out for being a fraud. My fraudulence continued to go unnoticed. I had to answer all kinds of questions about my life and childhood. I had never been to the United Kingdom. Fortunately, I was an English literature major and had watched 3 or 4 British movies. Mostly Monty Python. Thus, I was more or less an expert on all things British. Eventually, I got tired of doing the accent, so I started saying deliberately incorrect things about England to see if someone would call me out. Turns out that 21-year-old American women are too dumb to know a single thing about England, so they were incapable of pointing out my BS. I like to think that, to this day, 12 years later, there are girls out there who think that the British invented tea and only drink it on Wednesdays, that Cromwell was a benevolent leader who gave out free pheasant to the impoverished Irish, that James Bond was written by an Indian guy, and that the only reason that Brits are known to dress nicely is that it's illegal to not wear a tie on weekdays. The accent took over my mind so completely that when a guy in line at that restroom said something to me in a very clearly English accent, I instinctively responded in an English accent. He got excited. I realized what I had done, but just went with it and he introduced me to his mates. They mentioned that they couldn't pinpoint where I was from. I told them my mom was American and I lived half my life in Maine, and that's why I have a strange accent. Somehow they went with it. I brought the Brits back to our group, so now I had British homies. My friends couldn't believe it. I've entered British level 5000. So many level ups in so short a time. I got intimate with that girl again and even talked dirty to her Britishly. I said I'm arriving instead of I'm coming. The next morning, I admitted to her that I wasn't British. She didn't believe me and refused to accept that I was American. Whatever, I guess I was British for one more day. Thanks, Maggie, for the good time.
What's a piece of advice that could save your life one day? Never hire a private investigator on yourself. What they uncover might ruin your life. It's not every day that someone hires a private investigator, especially not my friend. She had her reasons, though. She suspected her husband of infidelity. So when she shared what the PI was able to find about her husband, it piqued my interest. I eagerly asked her for the investigator's card. At the time, I had a lot of extra cash, and my life had been feeling dull. I spent most of my days playing games and watching YouTube, and I wanted to shake things up. So I decided to hire the same private investigator as my friend. I told my boyfriend about my plan, and he was into it too. We came up with a plan for him to act like I was missing and submitted details about my family, occupation, and so on. I warned my boyfriend that we wouldn't be able to meet up while the investigation was happening, but he was fine with it. However, things quickly took a strange turn. When the PI got involved, he seemed to doubt my existence. My boyfriend had to convince him that I was real, and then the investigator kept accusing my boyfriend of wasting his time. Finally, on the 5th day of the investigation, my boyfriend called me in a panic. He claimed that the only person who had ever lived in the state with my name, which is very unique, had died a year before I was born. Even more eerily, this girl had lived in my childhood home. I thought my boyfriend was playing a prank, but his tone was bone-chilling. "I'm not playing a prank," he said. "The PI even took me to the gravesite. It had your exact name, down to your middle name." I was shocked and didn't know what to do. I called my mother to ask her what was going on. Her demeanor changed to one of seriousness, and she told me to stay where I was. Meanwhile, I contacted the private investigator and begged him for answers. He only asked me more irrelevant questions, like where I was born and my parents' names. When I mentioned that my mother was on her way to my apartment, the PI asked for her full name. When I provided it, he told me to leave my apartment immediately and come to his office before my mother arrived. As I rushed to grab my keys, my mother pulled into my driveway with a man I didn't recognize. He was wearing a winter jacket despite it being spring, and I felt like something was off. Before I could leave, the man pulled out a gun. I recognized it as my boyfriend's and ran to my neighbor's yard. Thankfully, nothing happened, and I eventually ran into my boyfriend's car. However, there was another man in the passenger seat. It was the private investigator. He explained to me that he had a theory that my parents were involved in a kidnapping that took place a few states over. They did this because the police had suspected them of neglecting their infant daughter, and when she ended up perishing, they had to completely replace the child so as to not get caught. My parents had never mistreated me in my life, so this all came to me as a shock. Of course, I denied it all at first. However, there was no reason for my mother to bring an armed stranger into my living space. We got the authorities involved and they excavated the backyard of my childhood home. They found the body of the child they had neglected. The child they had me replace. Several years have passed since then. I've done my best to avoid thinking about this situation. I have completely moved out of the country, leaving everyone behind. My friends, my boyfriend, and that private investigator. I have no idea how deep this rabbit hole goes. I don't know how many connections my parents have had. I don't even know my father's role in all of this. It just feels so overwhelming. I had to get it out there. I was reminded last night of just who my husband really is. He and I are on a quick getaway in New York City for our 21st anniversary. We've had many ups and downs in our marriage, but the last 3 years have been really tough. No adultery or anything, but have dealt with trust issues, communication issues, etc. Just life stuff that all seemed to pile up. We were at a Broadway show last night, and in our seats about 15 minutes before the curtain went up when there was a commotion about 5 rows ahead of us, a woman was slumped unconscious in her seat while her companion started begging for help. The place erupted into chaos with people calling 911, ushers running down the aisle, etc. My husband doesn't work in the medical field but has to be CPR certified for his job. When he realized what was happening, he jumped up, without a word, climbed over the seat in front of him, and ran down the aisle towards the woman who at this point had been laid on the floor. He spoke to the nurse who had run up to help and started doing chest compressions, while she took care of the mouth-to-mouth. I watched him work frantically on this woman, his shirt getting wet with sweat. I watched him stand up and form a barrier with a couple other people in front of her when the EMTs arrived to protect her as they had to open her shirt up. I watched him hug this woman's companion. I watched him trudge back to our seat exhausted. He got stopped numerous times by people calling him a hero, thanking him, etc. I watched him shake his head every time saying he was nothing of the sort. Wrong. He wanted no attention, no accolades, no praise. He just wanted to come sit next to me and put his head on my shoulder as he continued to shake from the adrenaline. I remembered who this man truly is. I had forgotten a bit. I remembered how he always tries to do what's right, always tries to take care of his family, and always tries to make the world a better place. I felt horrible that I had forgotten. I don't think I'll forget again. I was in awe of his quiet strength. I kept staring at him all night, just getting butterflies in my stomach. He is amazing. The woman lived, by the way. He saved her.